Can you hear it now? Hello. So we're going to interrupt your conversation. We know that's a large part of why we come together, and we're glad you're doing that. But we also have a great speaker today. So it's my pleasure to bring you this introduction. Before we do that, I just want to look a couple months out. Next month, we will not be here because you will all be where? At the Philanthropy Institute, Blue Ridge Community College. Please make sure you register for that. So we'll see you back here in August, and I'm going to ask Myra very quickly to tell you about the August program.
It's an interesting time in the North Carolina legislature, as it always is, but this week budget coming forth. And so in August, we're going to hear a program about how to work with your legislators and how some of the legislation coming out, especially this session, can affect nonprofits or may affect you in your work. Steve Metcalf grew up in this area. A lot of people in the room know Steve Metcalf. He was one of our North Carolina senators for a while. He and his son John have a business called the Policy Group. Been working with a number of different organizations, some in this area, for about 10, 15 years. They have about 40 years experience in local government. Steve was our first full-time county manager in Buncombe County. And I think you'll enjoy hearing how he and their firm interact and how you all can interact with legislatures and do good work that you do already.
Thanks, Myra. So it's my pleasure to introduce Scott Koskoski to you. He is from Pittsburgh, over there by Ohio, a great state.
Not so fast.
Scott is with Crouch and Associates, and his title is, I love this, Philanthropy Maximizer. I like it. But his background is academic and being in nonprofit arena for 20 years in fundraising and leadership. And Scott partnered with Bill Crouch, and they formed Crouch and Associates just 2 years ago. So they've covered a lot of territory in 2 years. As I read Scott's bio, what I like is he's done what we do. I mean, he's been a fundraiser in the academic world and in the nonprofit world. And now he leads and implements strategies designed to help nonprofit and educational institutions to leverage their strengths and maximize their philanthropic output. I made the mistake a few moments ago of making a comment about consulting, and he said, we aren't consultants. So I'm eager to introduce you to Scott and hear about that.
Thank you. Raise your hand if it's important to you to engage your constituents in social media. Raise your hand if it's important to you to prove to your boss that you are where you say you are. Therefore, join me in a selfie so I can. I'm here, right? All right. And I have your blanket permission to post that on our Facebook site. Thank you very much. So, this development director, I know he came to this is not the best place to stand. I'll stand over here. Sorry about that. And I gather you want me to use this? Would that help in the back?
Yes.
I'm a football player and a coach, so I can enunciate and amplify as well. But this development director, I know, he came to a magic lamp. And this genie popped out. And he said, I'll give you one wish. What is it? And the development director, I know very well, in this true story, said, well, I want $1 million for my organization. We need $1 million to hit our year-end goal. And so the genie said, that's fine. Come to your office tomorrow. It'll be there. I promise you. So the DOD comes to his office bright and early the next morning. He can't wait to tell his CEO the story of the $1 million gift that he raised from this anonymous donor. And he opens up his office door and 3 million binder clips fall out of his door. He says, what the heck? He said, I thought I was going to get $1 million. The genie comes out and he says, well, yeah, but you didn't say it couldn't be in kind. How many of us have been there? Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me today. It's really an honor and a blessing to be with people who are smarter than I am. And that is genuinely how Dr. Crouch and I started this firm. We're only 2.5 years old. And my job's not to sell what we do, so don't worry, no sales pitch is coming. But Bill served as the president of Georgetown College in Kentucky for 22 years. He served, in addition to the presidency, he was also, at the same time, the VP for advancement. Try doing that. Because his belief was that he couldn't find someone who can do the VP's role better than he could do it. And so he decided to do both. About 5 years before he left, he did hire a VP who he was finally comfortable with. Prior to that, he was vice president at Carson Newman for advancement. And he is also an ordained minister in the Baptist Church. And I had the wonderful opportunity to come alongside and be his not only equity partner, but his protege and his strategic mind as we started this firm. And 2.5 years in, we're very fortunate to be able to have national and international nonprofits like the United Way, Salvation Army, Make-A-Wish, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, Compassion International, among others. And we charge them a lot of money. And we tell them that we charge them a lot of money because we believe that the small and the mid-sized nonprofits and the institutions are the ones who need, they need the help more. I hesitate to say most, but they tend to need help more. And those are the firms that oftentimes couldn't hire good help. And so we provide, we undercharge those clients, and we provide some pro bono work as well. And we also have a nonprofit foundation in which we raise charitable dollars in order to fund work, whether it's our firm or another firm that may be better suited to provide. So we really believe in fundraisers. That's why we started the firm. We don't do capital campaigns. We don't do feasibility. We don't do searches. All the good stuff that you do and could do way better than we could do it. We just don't play in that space. Because fundamentally, we believe that we can do something about the 18 to 24 month turnover issue that continues to pervade and plague the fundraising space as a whole. We believe that we can do something about instilling vocational conviction in the fundraising space, creating the idea that this is a craft that must be cultivated and curated and refined over time. Raise your hand if you can honestly say, from day one in your career, that you intentionally pursued fundraising. Rest my case. A lot of you fell into it, right? A lot of you veered into it. A lot of you changed course at some time in your journey. And guess what? That's great. That's great. That's okay. But the aggregate of a nation of people who do that is that some of us aren't sure that we're in the right place, either organizationally or vocationally. Some of us aren't sure we're going to be doing this in 5 years. That's the honest reality. And what we try to do is create a fire that burns in the hearts of fundraisers, and to access and to prepare a fundraiser's heart to go out and access and prepare and cultivate the heart of a donor. Because philanthropy is not a response from here. Philanthropy is a response from here. And that's what we do, or that's why we do what we do, and how we do it is not to teach how to write another thank you note, or how to write that winning gift proposal. Again, there are a lot of good people that do that in this world, and we decided the world doesn't need another group telling them how to do it. We'd rather teach you how to deliver the gift proposal. We'd rather teach you how to get to know yourself as a fundraiser so that you can know your donors better than anybody else that they work with knows them. And we come at what we do through the guise of emotional intelligence, which many researchers, including the EAB, the Human Capital Institute, and the Future for Leadership of Conscious Capitalism say will be the most important factor in determining a nonprofit's success is the emotional, relational, cultural, and social intelligence of the people who populate that nonprofit in this era. Speaking of this era, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the era that we have found ourselves in as a country and how that might relate to fundraising, and to pontificate for a few minutes about what or how you might be able to ensure that your course remains just as successful. The ideas expressed in this following slide are the opinions of Crouch and Associates. Facts, and may be reproduced at any time. So with that said, go ahead. What do you want our code to be? You want a wink? You want a thumbs up? The word slide, we can do anything you'd like, Kim.
Just look at me.
All right.
I'll move it.
All right. A lot of noise out there in the world, right? CNN, like breaking news isn't even good enough for CNN. They need like a new moniker now, you know. Maybe just fire on the screen. I don't know what they're going to do next, okay? But we are living in a world that is quite different. How many of you started yours? So I'll just tell you, I'm 39 years old. I started my fundraising career in the Clinton administration. Raise your hand if you started in the George H.W. Bush administration fundraising. Anybody start in the Reagan administration? Any brave souls who may have started in the Carter administration? Carter? Nixon? Ford? Carter? How different is the world? You need a day and a half to talk about it. Yes. I didn't even have space on the slide to put Russia on here. I ran out of space. National. We are dealing with healthcare, tax reform, commitments to the arts, and everything else. What we always tell fundraisers, at least over the last 6 months, what we started telling them more and more is, you ought to be able to finish a meeting with a donor and them not be able to figure out who you voted for in the election. That's a good rule of thumb. If you can stay there with a donor. Because I'm willing to bet that some of you may need to be a little more careful these days in speaking with board members, in speaking with donors, in speaking with your colleagues, even. Heck, with speaking with your neighbors, even. Freewheeling free speech and being opinionated requires a little more thought these days, because the stakes are too high in fundraising. The reason the stakes are too high is because while the money in fundraising continues to increase, the latest Giving USA report out, a week, 10 days ago, illustrates that the sector continued to grow a little bit, right? We've surpassed pre-recession, levels. We did that not this year, but in the past. But the focus of donors continues to whittle. Quiz question. How many, go back to the year 2000, the year 2000, this is before the recession, this is before 9/11, how many charities, nonprofits, excluding church, on average, did the average American who defined themselves as charitable support? So someone who says, yeah, I'm a charitable person, I give. How many nonprofits on average did that adult person support in the year 2000?
Three.
Three. Five.
Two.
Giving money anywhere?
8.
12.
12.
Throughout the course of a year. Look, go into Target and drop a couple of bucks in the Salvation Army catalog. Okay? After 9/11, after the recession, after the aftermath of the recession, by 2015, okay, the average American who defines themselves as charitable, okay, who probably even gives more money than they would have or could have prior to that, how many charities does that person support on average in the year 2015? 3? 15? That's a range. 5.9. We are being savvier shoppers. Think about your own philanthropic lives. Think about your own philanthropic journey. I fall into that. I support less charities. I know I support less charities. My family and I do. We give more than we did, but we've started to build deep ends, right? Rather than make sure that everyone has a waiting time. This is a slightly tumultuous time we live in. The noise around us, the pressure at home, and home I mean work, and the need to please and be responsive to a ever-growing number of constituencies seemingly simultaneously has never put more pressure on a fundraiser to be on his or her game. And so I want to talk about how we can navigate that. Thank you. So the key for development professionals, I like to just get to the end first. I don't want to make you sit through the whole thing. I just want to go right to the end of the story. And the key is, in the year 2017, in moving forward, top performing development professionals commit and succeed at knowing their donors better than anyone. And I'll talk to that in a moment. Top performing development professionals in this era, where the stakes are highest, know that retention trumps acquisition. Some of you might be coming up to the end of your fiscal years, June 30th. Who's out there with experimenting with acquisition strategies on June 21st? But a lot of you aren't, because a lot of you get to a point in the fiscal year and say, you know what, we've got to round up who was in the barn last year, okay, and we've got to focus on retention. Keeping the donors you already have is amazingly important. As you know, it's cheaper to keep a donor that you already have. It's easier to keep a donor you already have, et cetera, et cetera. Not to say acquisition is not important, but in this era, you have to keep the piece of the pie that you've earned and that you've already worked for. Top performing organizations and fundraisers own the concept of gratitude. They decide, it's a mindset thing. They decide that they will steward and express gratitude. And stewardship and gratitude are two different things. But they will own gratitude. And they will abundantly express gratitude to their donors in ways that can take your benefits chart or your giving levels and your check the box for what you get when you give at a certain level, and they'll take that transactional giving mindset and say, you know what, retention is everything. We've got to keep who we have, and we need to be known as the organization that says thank you in newer, more unique ways that expresses heartfelt gratitude to our donors, from the board, to the staff, to the volunteers. We're going to own gratitude. And this is an incredibly important time to advocate for our profession. Regardless of who you voted for, you heard a lot from the Trump administration coming in about getting America's employees back to work, jobs, the economy, business, driving it forward. Ford Motor Company, et cetera, et cetera. And how a strong business climate is so important. It's everything behind our economy. I wish that the same level of language and the same volume and the same story was out there for fundraising, out there for the nonprofit sector in terms of creating a better world. And prior to the permanency of the IRA, the charitable IRA rollover provision, there was an ambivalence towards incentivized giving that I think we've come in the right direction on over the last couple of years. But one of the biggest roles that you can play as a chapter and individually is to simply advocate for what you do, and thank God that AFP exists to help us together as a community of fundraisers do that. But to express what we do in the community at a greater level. We're not that many years removed from folks who don't do what we do, thinking that fundraising was something that you needed to do followed by a shower to clean it off. Or that fundraising was somehow a volunteer job or a part-time job. This is a full-fledged profession. It's a craft. It takes skill and experience and discipline and accountability and dedication and everything that out there takes as well. And in the face of uncertainty and unpredictability in terms of your organization's future, the future of communities around us, and even as a country, it's never been more important that we advocate for who we are, what we do, and most importantly, why we do what we do. Our biggest challenges as fundraisers, we continue to find, whether we are working with the United Way or a small community college or a small faith-based nonprofit or a secular nonprofit. Our biggest challenges that we see in fundraisers are fear, anxiety, stress, and paralysis. Paralysis, of course, the opposite of action. And we know that over time, the most successful development professionals are folks who are not afraid to take action, who don't let the stress of what might not happen if they don't do something, if they don't ask, if they don't position a conversation in a certain way, get in the way of taking action. What we do is try to coach, and I'll tell you how in a second, but these all together add up to equal the catchphrase, "It's not that bad." And that is the death knell, we feel, of a nonprofit who's in the business, or an educational institution who's in the business of raising money, is the mindset, it could be worse. It's not that bad. To those people we say, reset your ground floor. Think about your potential. Pretend it is that bad. Don't think about all the ground below you that you are very fortunate that you're not slipping down into. Reset where that floor is and reframe the ceiling and start climbing from there. Start taking action. If you are deliberating a move with a donor today, make the move. Make a move. Right? Go ahead. Thank you. So we've thought a lot about the secret sauce and what the top performing fundraisers in this era will need to have, and those that are top performers already have. And I'll tell you about how we define top performers and how we got to that. If fear and stress and paralysis and anxiety equal this, it's not that bad, things could be worse mentality in your organization, in this profession, the top performers will have a lethal combination of knowledge plus wisdom. When I first heard the word wisdom, I'll admit, I thought wisdom was something that you had to wait a long time for. And that when my hair is much whiter than it could be by now, with 4 small children, that wisdom would be something I'd get sometime down the road. And when I got wisdom, I'd be all done. My journey would be over. I would have climbed to the mountaintop. We know that wisdom is something that can actually be taught and learned experientially. And that a lot of fundraisers aren't awake to the wisdom that they already possess. It needs to be galvanized within them, leveraged within them. And if you have this combination of knowledge plus wisdom, and I'll define those in just a second, we think the sky's the limit for you in this era. Wisdom being the more important of the two. Go ahead. So knowledge. Go ahead. You ever heard of these phrases? Moves management, strategic planning, best practices. Boy, if I would have coined the term best practices for fundraising, and if I had a binder clip for every one of the times I've heard best practices, I could give you $1 million. This is all important stuff in fundraising. Obviously, the 5 I's of fundraising, from identification to involvement to investment, are extremely important to moving donors through the continuum of engagement with your organization. It is important to have necessary and appropriate strategic planning processes that will guide the work of your unit, your team, your organization, your board, etc., etc. By the way, we coach against the 3 to 5 year strategic plan. It's just too uncertain. Develop an 18-month strategic plan. Be happy with that, and that way you're forced to be more active in your strategic plans, to remember your strategic plans, to course correct your strategic plans. If any of you can write a 5-year strategic plan and have that perfectly executed 4 years and 11 months out, I want to hire you today. And of course, best practices. This vague kind of neighborhood of things we say and do that others who have done it well say and do, and things that we read should be done. But all of these kind of add up to fundraising knowledge. Yes, you need to learn about ethics and fundraising, and you need to know a lot about it. And ethics and fundraising is more important than ever. And that was my alternative presentation today, because it's that important. Yes, you need to know how to live and work within the bounds and the rules and the policies and the protocols of your organizations. Yes, you need to learn the science of major hit fundraising for those of you in a front-facing role. Yes, yes, yes. But there's another piece to being a top-performing fundraiser in this era. In an era in which you need to know who you're sitting across the table from more than you've ever needed to know who you're sitting across the table from. In an era in which the political stakes, not just in Washington, our country and the world, but the political stakes between you and your relationships with your peers, your leadership, your board, and your donors have never been more important. This will help navigate that for you. It's wisdom. To sustain an impactful fundraising program, you must have effective teams, an engaged board, artful fundraising to balance with the science of fundraising. But that secret is wisdom. Go ahead, Kim. We define wisdom as knowledge plus insight plus judgment. So the knowledge piece we discussed before, plus insight that comes from getting to know other people, leaning into those that you're working with and for and serving, and effective judgment, discernment, discretion, knowing yourself so that you can know others, so that you can act and be the appropriate reaction and response to the action that's preceded it. Wisdom is building good habits and good processes. In an age of never-ending distractions, never-ending technology, your ability to maintain discipline and accountability has never been more tested, nor is more important. Okay? So here are 5 steps to widen your fundraising lens with wisdom during what may be a slightly tumultuous next 4 years. This is what we coach. This is what we teach. This is what we implement with organizations large and small, and this is what works, or at least has worked for us and those that we work with. I mentioned top performing development professionals. One of the first things we do when we start working with someone is give them what is called the PXT assessment. It's called Profile XT, PXT for short. It is a proprietary to Crouch & Associates emotional intelligence for fundraising assessment that we developed and beta tested with 2,700 front-facing development professionals across the United States. And we're very proud of the process. It went through 2 rounds. It went through 2 rounds of testing. Essentially, we could go into any organization like your educational institution and say, yep, based on this assessment, I can identify that he, her, and him are your top 3 performers, and she, her, and I'm running out of pronouns. Yep, are your weaker 3 performers. And our assessment measures your fundraising, emotional, cultural, relational, and social intelligence in 16 different categories. And managers think it's cool because they get a roll-up managers report that shows where everybody on the team is in areas like sociability and in areas like accommodation. How well do you accommodate donors in a conversation? Assertiveness. We're working with North Carolina State University right now, who recently increased their campaign goal to north of $1.6 billion. We gave their assessment to 147 development professionals in their shop, and it turns out that 2 out of 3 development professionals in NC State, and I hope there's no one here, but well, they know this by now, 2 out of 3 of them aren't assertive, and they're in a $1 billion plus capital campaign. We showed it to the vice president and said, you think we have a little problem here? Because a majority of your folks are fundamentally extremely low in their assertiveness skills. So we're coaching their teams against that, increasing their emotional intelligence by putting them through assertiveness school. And we have training curriculums for all of the areas of fundraising emotional intelligence that you could possibly think that would need, that could stand improvement. We call it a why. Ever heard of Simon Sinek? Start with Why, the book, the TED Talk, etc. All of us at our firm are certified why trainers. If we have the time, in 10 minutes a piece, 10 minutes a piece, so we don't have the time clearly, but I could sit with every one of you in 10 minutes and determine what your why is. Some people call it a calling. Some people call it a significance, a sacred trust. You name the phrase, we call it a why, because we paid Simon Sinek for the right to call it a why. But essentially, you've got to know yourself. You've got to know what your why is. Why are you sitting in the chair that you're in? Why are you sitting in the office that you're in at your organization? What is it about you that gives you the opportunity to be successful, or that that allows you to put your heart on the table for the mission of your organization. Your donors have a why too. We teach you how to align the why of your donors, how to first of all find it out, and to align their why with the organization's why. But it all comes from self-awareness. You've got to know yourself before you can truly and genuinely access the heart of anybody else. And then the feedback loop. Go ahead, Kim. Practicing self-awareness, as I said, you've got to learn as a fundraising professional how to be resilient, how to overcome disappointment, and how to practice deep dives. You know, repeating the phrase to yourself, hey, if I bat 300 in fundraising, and I'm told no 7 out of 10 times, but I'm batting 300, that's still pretty good. Remind yourselves that once in a while. And when disappointment comes, remember that there's a difference between disappointment and tragedy. It's one of the great lessons for a fundraiser to keep on remembering. It's important to practice deep dives. I talked about the endless distractions that technology, devices, screens provide us, that open door policies, because it sounds so great to say that everyone has an open door policy, but sometimes you need the darn door closed. What we encourage fundraising organizations to do is to create a canopy space. We had the opportunity to go spend a day with the Blue Angel pilots about a year and a half ago when we'd gotten the firm off the ground. We went down and we spent a day with them, and we learned all about being a Blue Angel pilot. A Blue Angel pilot's mission, okay, or the routine, can't last longer than 43 minutes. The reason is because they believe you stop concentrating. Your concentration reduces after that point in time. There is nothing in a Blue Angel plane that does not, in terms of instrumentation in the cockpit, there's nothing that doesn't need to be there. Absolutely nothing that doesn't need to be there. Potential distraction. One more thing for your eye to catch, right? So we said, wow, that's how you gain top performance. How can we create that same space in a fundraising environment so that for 43 minutes at a time, I could go in without devices, without distractions, without music, which, you know, some say can increase your concentration, we think can decrease your concentration. How can I go focus on one donor, one problem? How can I focus on my portfolio, on whatever it is, okay, for 43 minutes at a time? So NC State has created canopy spaces in every one of their colleges and schools' development offices where you can go and reserve the room and block out everything else and solve a problem, complete a mission, okay? And we think that's important. The other thing that the Blue Angel pilots do, as soon as they get out of the plane, they say thank you. They say thank you to the junior mission controller who was on the ground the entire time. How many of you have come back from closing a major gift and went straight to the prospect research office and said, I just want to thank you for that gift? Incredibly important, isn't it?
Yes.
Not many do. Not many close that loop and say, you know, because of you, we are able to do this. And I just wanted to say thank you. Very first thing, I haven't even told the VP yet. Thank you. You got to know your why. These are the 9 whys that you possess one of these as your primary driver, your primary calling. This makes you tick. You have a why. Your team has a why. Your organization has a why. Your donors have one of these 9 whys. Your executive director, your board chair, you name it, your spouse, your neighbors and friends, they all have one of these 9 whys. We can read anyone's why in 10 minutes. But once you know your why, it's not hard. It's not hard to figure out somebody's why. But once you know the why of a donor, you begin to center that why in your relationship with that donor. You begin a mission of honoring and serving that donor's why. and aligning and tying it to the mission of your organization. Imagine if the major donor you're working with, the pivotal donor you're working with, what if you were the only fundraising organization working with that donor that actually knew their purpose, their why? What if you started serving and honoring that purpose, customizing your cultivation strategy around their purpose for being, not your purpose for being, their purpose for being? How would that set you apart as a fundraising organization? How would that set your message apart? What would that do for philanthropy? It's all about honoring the why of a donor. Go ahead, Kim. We want you to change your old habits. We talked about concentration in the canopy. Self-accountability is incredibly important. At our firm, we created, because we like simplicity, we created a very simple form called the 5x15 report. We call it 5x15 because it should take you less than 15 minutes to write it and less than 5 minutes to read it. We also call it 5:15 because you should turn it in by 5:15 on a Friday afternoon before you leave for the weekend. And it simply says this, you turn it into your supervisor, and it simply says, this week I accomplished these 3 most important tasks. 1, 2, 3. These obstacles or challenges made my job more difficult this week. 1, 2, 3. And next week I'm focused on achieving the following 3 most important objectives. 1, 2, 3. You have your team start to do this every Friday afternoon before they leave, where they get to celebrate what they did. They get to tell you about their distractions and obstacles and challenges. By the way, those will become repetitive, and you'll start to understand what's really getting in the way of your folks' ability to be successful, so you can start to attack that, because your job as a manager is to remove the obstacles and distractions that keep them from being successful. And then next week, here's what they're going to do. And the very last thing before they shut it down for the weekend is to remind themselves what their must list is for the following week. The second, the complementary tool to that is called the 6x6. This is every 6 weeks. You and your supervisor negotiate your 6 key priorities for the next 6 weeks. And then you both sign off on them. You establish a 6-week review date, and off you go. You accomplish one of these things, you cross it off. You're done. You get to the end of the 6-week period, and some are still in progress, some are still done, some haven't started yet. Imagine having 9 of these in your file, in your supervisor's file, so that year-end evaluations can be more efficient and effective. And imagine seeing one of your direct reports, 6x6 report every 6 weeks, and most of it hasn't been started yet. Most of it just carries over from week to week. Wow. Let's talk about productivity. Let's talk about self-accountability and self-discipline. So we believe in simple tools to increase self-accountability. We believe in eliminating drama. Part of that is distractions. Drama is mostly manufactured, not real, and has the ability to create wedges and time sucks and everything else that stops you from achieving your mission. If you have a drama eliminator in your organization, no matter where they are on the organizational chart, empower the drama eliminator to do their job. Because leadership, by the way, can be anywhere in the organizational chart. Mindfulness. Stay disciplined. Every day, this is the weekly report, this is the every 6-week report. We have a daily notepad that we put on our organization, our client organization's desk, called the must list. I could go on for days about the average to-do list of the person in this room, but it's too long, and you probably start midway or at the bottom. And you feel great about yourself, and I'm generalizing it, of course, now, and trying to be humorous. But you start midway or through the bottom, you've got a 15-item to-do list, you get like 7 of the bottom 15 done, and you're feeling great, and it's 10:30, let's go to lunch. And you'll get to Tuesday, you'll get to Wednesday, and number 1 and number 2 are starting to maybe collect a little dust, on the average person's to-do list. And then it's the end of the week, and well, look, I got 11 things done, but numbers 1, 3, and 4 are still out there. Well, why'd you write those first? Those were probably higher priorities. So we created what we call the must list. It's 4 items. Reduce your to-do list to 4 items. call it the must list, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and below it, you've got to justify why that is important. Here's the item, here's why it's important. 1, 2, 3, and 4, every day, the list starts anew. And of course, using meetings wisely. You should obviously discern if meetings are necessary, why meetings are necessary, how long meetings are going. Meetings, the book Death by Meeting, that culture can really exist in an organization and slow down productivity and impede wisdom. Go ahead, Kim. Tell stories. We believe that every board meeting should feature a story. You've probably heard of mission moment. If you're not doing it, why? Why not? Go a step further. Create a binder. I have some binder clips I can give you. Create a binder for every one of your board members. Every meeting, have there be a story told. Not about the numbers. We serve more than 30,000. We provide 800 of these. We have spent $5 million on this. Look, that's all impressive. Your board members want to hear about Sue. Your donors want to hear about Sue. I throw away appeal letters that come to my house that talk about productivity and impact in volume. I want to hear about Jimmy and Joe, and Sally and Sue. I want to know their story. I can't solve everybody's problem, but I can do something about one person, about one student, about one recipient of social services or human services. If you put this in human terms, not dollar terms. That's what we coach. Think like a wealthy person. Oh, by the way, the storybook. So the storybook. At every board meeting, you tell a story. You take that story, you make a laminated version of it, and you give one copy to every board member. They put it in their binder. They bring the binder to every board meeting. Over time, they have a collection of stories of impact for your organization. Your board is now empowered to be storytellers for your organization. No excuse for them not to be. Think like a wealthy person. We had the opportunity to interview the wealthiest person in the state of North Carolina, at least as of 2 years ago. And we said, help us understand how a wealthy person thinks. Since that time, we've interviewed probably 50 people with $1 billion plus net wealth who are charitable. Some of whom just by calling their people on the phone. We had no relationship with them. We just start calling. Bill Crouch, by the way, got his public speaking career by learning from Billy Graham. Not because he knew him, but because he saw Billy Graham, heard Billy Graham on the radio, heard a crusade, decided he wanted to be as good as a public speaker as Billy Graham, and found his way up to Billy Graham. We interviewed the wealthiest person in the state of North Carolina. He said, trust me, I get 15 fundraising calls a month, if that's a good month for me, which means low month. He said, every time I'm sitting across the table from one of you, I think the same thing. How stupid you are. This gentleman said, you never make it about the values and the qualities that folks like us have and appreciate. He said, Bill, Scott, he said, there are very few wealthy people that don't appreciate beauty. There are very few wealthy people that don't appreciate arts and the culture, even if they're not outright supporters of the arts and culture. And he said, there are very few wealthy people that don't like the concept of shalom, peace. He said, I just wish one of you would come to me and talk to me about your organization as a piece of the solution in terms of a peaceful life, peaceful world, and moving and aspiring moving this world towards the aspirational vision of something beautiful. He said, in fact, I'll tell you a story. He said a university in this state, maybe one of yours, just came to me and asked me to build a building. And they put a picture
of the architectural blueprint, not the artist rendering, but the blueprint on the cover of the proposal. He said, I didn't even open the proposal. I just said no. He said, because I had spent about 1.5 years being cultivated consciously by this organization. I had them in my home. They took me out to dinner. They knew what my interests were. They knew the things that really turned me on as a donor. But they came to me for the ask and made it all about them. If I had to tell them one more time about my love for art and my passion for elegance and beauty and how students could learn better if they were in an atmosphere of elegance and beauty, he said, I wish I would have seen some evidence that they were listening to me in the proposal. That university went back to that gentleman, was allowed back, and on the cover of the proposal was a Monet painting. That would be in the hall of the building. Got a gift. Wealthy people appreciate elegance and beauty. And the other irony here is, I don't know about you, but I can speak to my background. I grew up in a family that was not wealthy. I grew up in a family that was middle of the middle class. Most fundraisers did not grow up wealthy people. But you've got to think like one. It doesn't mean you act like one. It doesn't mean you talk like one. In fact, the servant's culture is the humble culture is the posture that you want. But you've got to learn how to think like a wealthy person. Okay? And finally, we want you to be a multiplier. Specifically, we want you to be a joy multiplier. This is fundraising wisdom. There are two kinds of people in the world when it comes to joy. There are joy thieves and joy multipliers. There are active joy multipliers and passive joy multipliers. There are active joy thieves and passive joy thieves. I'm going to admit guilt to something. In order to relate to in order to relate to donors earlier in my career, I used to sit across from a donor who would tell me about their recent ski trip to Breckenridge, Colorado. And sit there and say, okay, I want to hang in this conversation, right? I want to show that I'm relatable because I want this donor to like me, because I want to gift, because that's my job. So I'm going to respond to this story about the donor's ski trip to Breckenridge by talking about my ski trip to Switzerland. Oh, no. I was the fundraiser topper. I was the topper. And I had to be pulled aside, not by my boss, but by a donor one day, who said, you know, it's really not fun telling you things and then having you feel like you got to one-up me. Joy thief. Joy thief. Passive joy thief, but joy thief. Active joy thief. Donor tells you about their new grandbaby. And you say, oh, my parents already told me if I ever have a grandkid, no, don't even bring them around the house because they have had enough kids around their house and they don't want them. Active joy thief. Don't be a joy thief. Be a joy multiplier in the life of a donor and watch how quick the phone will answer, how quickly the emails will be returned. Again, it's not about you. It's about them all the time. Go ahead, Kim.
I'm good. Can I stop you there?
Sure. And we're done. I'm pretty done, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, if anybody has any questions, because we're...
Yeah. I think I'm on my second to last slide.
Oh, yeah.
Let's zip through this. Remember engaged boards. Go ahead. Let's rapid fire. We want your board members to be raving advocates for your nonprofit. We do a lot of work with boards. Ask yourself, are your boards raving advocates for your nonprofits right now? Next slide. Remember that 2% of board members have your organization on their LinkedIn page. Ask your board members to put your organization on their LinkedIn page. Go on. We talked about the storybook and gratitude. Go on. Final thought. It's not the most knowledgeable that will thrive in this area or in this era, but those that can manage traveling through an unknown sea with fundraising wisdom. Knowing yourself, knowing the donor's why, honoring and serving the donor's why. Self-discipline, self-accountability, discernment, mindfulness, wisdom. Questions?
You mentioned in a few slides, excellent presentation by the way, thank you for coming today. You mentioned that some very wealthy appreciate elegance. Could you touch on those that are incredibly humble by their physical appearance, by their modest means that they present, but actually have significant capacity?
I'm reminded of, this is not a political statement, but I'm reminded of Michael Bloomberg during the Democratic National Convention last year. Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, who made a public comment, and this is not word for word, but made a public comment similar to, if Trump was really a billionaire, he wouldn't act like that. No. And it was during the convention. And again, without being political, there's a lot of truth to that. There are more millionaires next door than you know. Assets are not incredibly hard to come by. Growth in assets is not incredibly hard to achieve. And as a blanket statement, the billionaires and the wealthy folks that we talk to for the purposes of writing this book, our firm's first book called Wisdom, all, with the exception of maybe one or two, all had a modesty, a quiet modesty, a humility to them, a gracefulness, and a sense of being a true gentleman or lady. It was almost universal. And what we found was that the idea of finding the why of a mega wealthy person was more intense for us. That experience was more intense for us and them. And helping a donor understand how their charitable life can reflect their why is extremely important. I happen to, I told Kim at lunch, I have the honor and the opportunity to manage the philanthropy of Miss Betty White, America's Golden Girl. I know Betty's why. And there's nothing that she doesn't do philanthropically. Look, she could do anything she wanted to do philanthropically, but there's nothing she doesn't do philanthropically that doesn't reflect her reason for being. But it's not in a loud way. Other questions?
I'm going to stand up and say, I got to go.
Thank you for coming. I apologize for going long. It's something that we're very passionate about, but thank you so much for your attention today. And I've got some examples of these tools up front if anyone's interested. Thank you.